So you would have been fine. 5 to just... Well, that's it, isn't it?
Should we make it start?
Oh, yeah, your phone. Yeah, as long as you take your phone, I just go like
Okay, we might make a start. Thank you. Before I start today's meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So welcome everyone in the gallery tonight. Item 1 is membership. So membership is listed in the agenda. Item 2, apologies. There are no apologies. Item 3, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Are there any disclosures? No disclosures. Item 4, confirmation of minutes of the planning committee. The minutes of the last meeting. Thank you, Councillor Greco. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Yep.
Okay. Can you hear me now? No? Can we get... Is that any better? Great. Thank you. So I'll put the item 4, confirmation of minutes of the planning committee to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Item 5, consideration of reports. 5.1, application for planning permit at 208 to 216 High Street, Preston. Officers.
The application is for a 7-storey plus 2 levels of basement and part mezzanine mixed-use development, including 4 shops and 77 dwellings. 83 car parking spaces and 62 bicycle parking spaces are proposed to be provided. The site is located in the Priority Development Zone Schedule 2, and this portion of High Street is zoned Road Zone Category 2. There is no restrictive covenant registered on the title. The application was advertised and 12 objections were received as summarised on page 14 and responded to in detail on pages 15 to 17 of the agenda. The proposal is considered to comply with the purposes of the Preston Central Incorporated Plan and the objectives of the Priority Development Zone as a multi-level mixed-use development featuring residential uses at the upper floors and an active retail frontage at ground floor level. The 7-storey height is considered acceptable given the recently constructed 7-storey building on the adjoining property to the south, the lack of sensitive residential interfaces to the rear, and the location within a principal activity centre. The development includes secluded private open space to all dwellings in the form of balconies, as detailed on page 21 of the agenda, as well as a communal lounge, courtyard and gardens on the 7th floor. Adequate car parking and bicycle parking is provided, given that the site is located in the Preston Central Principal Activity Centre with excellent access to public transport as set out in pages 13 and 14 of the agenda. The layout of the dwellings allows for significant light ports to the north and south whilst protecting the equitable development rights of the land in the north and the amenity of apartments within the development on the adjoining property to the south. Significant conditions that form part of the recommendation include condition number 1H on page 4, which requires a revised street wall to High Street that reflects the fine grain shop fronts in the area, and condition number 1AA on page 6, which requires a vehicle passing area to be incorporated to the right of way to the rear. Both conditions have been responded to by the applicant in plan form, and these plans are included in the item attachments. Therefore, the approval is recommended subject to conditions. Therefore, the approval is recommended subject to conditions outlined on pages 4 to 12 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite a representative for the applicant to address us. So, Kathy Pearl or Michael Alexandru or Josh Delaney.
Unfortunately, none of those is here. I am the actual applicant, the owner of the project. And
Do you wish to address us? What was your name, sorry?
my name is Spiros Giuseppos. I'm the owner of 208 to 216 High Street, Preston, which is the application for.
So you wish to present to us now?
Well, I haven't got anything formal to present to you since I was expecting all those people that you just mentioned to be here. So verbally, I can address.
Of course,
you.
yeah. Please sit down, and you have 5 minutes to address.
A very good evening to all, and hopefully all have a good, very good, nice Christmas after this. And after so many years, I hope the response here will be good from the drivers and everyone use, that we actually have come a long way to address all the issues for the council, whatever they asked us, even later in the last couple of weeks, we thought it was already everything addressed. They've asked us something and we did what we could in their own merits, and thank John and the other people that were trying to put us in a path where we could do exactly what they wanted us to do. We practically did what they told us more than what we wanted. We believe from in my buying business, I've got to get into a lot of units. I know that our units are going to be far bigger than a lot of the others could, including the next door units, and also the facilities, the car park, the entrance, the air, all those things. And we worked with the 2 traffic engineers. One of them was actually suggested by the council because they were not, for some reason, totally happy with ours. So we addressed it for more than twice. And of course, like I repeated myself earlier, we addressed every little detail to make the council as happy as possible. And we're looking forward to have the same response from you tonight.
Thank you. You may return to your seat in the gallery. Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to understand the information from the officers, so through you to the officers.
Yes.
Where are the objections? It has on the first page objections in red. They're usually dots. Are the objections shown on that page?
Officers?
Yes, Madam Chair. The objections are not within the 200 metres, so they're not shown in that location because they're further away.
Thank you.
Okay. And just supplementary, so that's why there's no names or addresses in the second page.
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, I just had a question in relation to the mix of dwellings, and through you, Chair, if I can ask the officers, what is the actual mix of the dwellings? Because it was not clear from the report between the 1 and 2 bedrooms.
Madam Chair, the mix of dwellings is 26 one-bedroom dwellings and 51 two-bedroom dwellings.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor McCarthy?
Yeah, just I suppose a bit of clarification from our officers through you, Chair. My understanding is this application would be affected by the new ESD controls, the environmentally sensitive design controls that Council has adopted. I'm just wanting to get clarity as to whether that is the case. My reading of clause 8 in particular, around water sensitive urban design, seems to be new language as a condition, so I'm just wanting to get some clarification in that regard.
Officers?
Yes, Madam Chair. The applicant has included a sustainability management plan as a response to Council's RFI This is something that we've asked them to include water-sensitive urban design, which is touched on in that sustainability management plan. However, with regard to Clause 8, that's where we've pushed a bit harder with regard to the proposed condition for a WSID plan to be implemented as part of the development.
And just the substantive part of that question, sorry, because there's probably two parts to that question. Is this development then bound by the new ESD controls that Council has put through as a planning scheme amendment?
Officers?
Madam Chair, the new controls haven't been utilised as part of this assessment of this application. This has been dealt with via largely 22.06, which goes into the sustainability controls for this one.
Thank you.
Can I just get a clarification as to why those controls haven't been applied in this regard?
Yes, Madam Chair. We have not utilised those controls given the fact that we've asked for a WSID plan, so we believe that covers further than what we allow for under 22.06 in this current time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any further questions? There's the recommendation in front of us. Would anyone like to move that recommendation?
I will. So before there is a recommendation, there is another question which I wasn't sure if anyone else is going to ask. It's just the property on the north side. Do we know what the development plans are for that at this stage? There was reference by the applicant to, or maybe through our officers, regarding awareness of the development rights of adjoining properties. So just wanting to understand what's proposed to the north of this site.
Yes, Madam Chair. There's currently no application in and no approval on that site. The equitable development rights was specifying that there was a light port that was substantial on that boundary.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Lawrence?
I'd like to move the officer recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Williams? Councillor Lawrence, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. This application, as we've heard, has gone through a lengthy process with officers and has a range of conditions on it that go above and beyond what's being built near it. Of course, there's been a review of the apartment sizes since then, in terms of the 8-storey next door. But it was also good to hear that the water-sensitive urban design is being applied, and we're pushing the envelope in some of those areas. And of course, again, it's also good that we have set this area for this scale of development, and we do have a situation where a long-term owner is working with the council to try and affect what we've laid out there and not rushing off to VCAT.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
This application permit has been started back in 2006. It's been amended on numerous times, and it's great that the owner has been working towards getting a better outcome, and hopefully this is a win-win for everybody in this situation from today.
Thank you. Do any other councillors wish to speak?
Yes.
Councillor Rennie?
Thank you. I'd like to speak against this, whilst acknowledging that the application has a number of merits and is in fact stronger than some similar applications we've seen. It is 7 storeys in an area where the preferred height is 6, and I don't see a reason why we vary from the preferred height. I'd like to foreshadow an alternate motion that approves it at 1 floor less. I think that if we have a preferred height of 6, we should stick to the preferred height of 6 as a principle, and whilst there are certain things about this development that are desirable, particularly some of the communal spaces, some of the apartments are slightly bigger than the minimum, I don't think it is so extraordinary or offers such fabulous amenity that we should actually vary our preferred height.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak?
Just a process question, if I can. Given that Councillor Rennie has foreshadowed an alternative motion, which is actually an approval of the proposal but at a lower height, I'm wondering whether that would actually could be an amendment to the substantive motion that's moved. If I can get an answer through you, Chair. whether the amendments
the
can be moved
the
as
question-
amendments to the substantive.
So the question is, does Councillor Rennie wish to propose an amendment? Is that...
If that option is available, I'd be very happy to propose an amendment to Councillor Lawrence to approve this building with, as one of the conditions, deletion of the 6th floor. It's actually deleting the 6th floor, which is level 5 of the building, which will bring it back to being a 6th floor development rather than 7.
Does Councillor Lawrence accept that amendment?
I just seek some advice in terms, because we are in the planning committee and there's stakeholders involved.
Yep.
Advice from the governance manager in that we have got a motion moved and seconded
Through you, Madam
in
Chair.
terms of officer recommendation.
Yeah, so the government circle law applies to the planning committee as well, so if there is an amendment and it's accepted by the mover and the secondary, it can be considered. Otherwise, it would be put as an alternate motion once the vote's been taken.
Councillor Lawrence, would you like clarification of the officers about this?
Well, I need to ask through you, Madam Chair, how reduction of 1 storey would affect this application.
Officers?
Yes, Madam Chair. The reduction of the 6th floor would wipe out those apartments, but it may have issues with regards to the car parking situation in the basement and ground floor levels, given that they've been allocated by way of proposed conditions.
So just a supplementary through you, because we
Yes.
obviously don't have these alternate plans to look at. Would that car parking alteration make any breach of policy or in excess?
Officers?
Yes, Madam Chair, the car parking would be in excess, but it'd just be the technicality of the condition and how that worked with allocating car parking spaces per dwelling.
Thank you.
Can I ask a separate process question then,
Yes.
based on Councillor Lawrence's question? Would there be other conditions that are required to be amended as a result of deleting one of the floors? So are there other conditions that would require amendments based on if that was to be accepted or approved?
Officers?
Madam Chair, I'll just check quickly. Have a look for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Madam Chair, there's a number of conditions that I'll highlight here. Condition 1P would be removing the reference to apartment numbers on that level. Conditions 1Q would be also removing apartment numbers that are referred to on that level. Condition 1V, level 6 would become level 5, so that would just be referring to that in the correct terminology. Conditions 1X would be similar, referring to the correct apartment numbers. Condition 22, where the car parking allocations are set out. I'll just check that. Actually, that one would be fine because it allocates it to the uses rather than the numbers or apartment numbers, other than the total dwellings in brackets after condition 22A. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one quick supplementary question.
Yes.
In terms of the deletion of the seventh floor?
Fifth floor. It's deleting the sixth story, which is actually the fifth floor of the apartment.
In terms of deletion of that, what does that do to the mix of apartments of 1 and 2 bedrooms?
Officers?
Madam Chair, that would delete 7 of each, so 7 one-beds and 7 two-beds.
Thank you.
And sorry, just based on that, can we just get an outline of what the proposed split of 1 and 2 beds was again, so that we can understand the variation in the ratio?
26, 1 and 52, 2.
21 2.
So 20.
26 one bedroom, 21 two bedroom.
51.
So
51 2 bedrooms.
That's the
51,
current.
2 bedroom.
No, that's what it'll go down to. No, that's the
No, that's the current. So you take 7 off each of those figures. Yeah.
So if my crude mathematical calculations are correct, Chair, it would actually increase the proportion of two-bedders as part of the final development proposal, only slightly. Is that
Madam Mayor,
correct?
on the basis of those sort of range of issues, I'm more inclined to put the officer recommendation and see how that goes.
Councillor Amir?
I'd like to ask an additional question. On the plans viewed from the west elevation, it appears that the height of the proposed building is lower than the height of the building at 204 High Street, and I wanted to confirm whether that was indeed the case, and that was at the full proposed height was still lower than the adjoining building.
Yes, Madam Chair, I can confirm that it's half a metre higher on the northern element.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers?
If
Councillor-
Councillor Reddy is prepared to
Oh, sorry.
move an amendment,
Not
I'm happy to second the amendment.
Right. So Councillor Lawrence did not accept the amendment. Ms Stevens, do you want to clarify?
Through you, Madam Chair. It's probably, Councillor Rennie did foreshadow an alternative motion from the start. So it's proposed to go with the officer recommendation as moved by Councillor Lawrence, seconded by Councillor Williams. If that is unsuccessful, then we can then go to Councillor Rennie's foreshadowed motion.
Sorry, if I'm correct though, if Councillor Rennie's moved an alternative, sorry, an amendment, and there's a seconder to the amendment.
Foreshadow to the motion.
Well, I know I heard, unless I heard incorrectly, I heard that Councillor Rennie had
So,
proposed an amendment.
so just to clarify, Councillor Rennie foreshadowed a motion. Councillor McCarthy asked a process question about whether it could be dealt with during this motion. I asked Councillor Rennie whether she would like to propose the change as an amendment, and then we asked Councillor Lawrence whether he accepted that amendment. So I guess, Councillor McCarthy, you're asking, do we now treat this as a standalone motion?
I was just wanting to know, well, I heard Councillor Greco wanting to second the amendment, so I'm just wanting to know if we're going to hear that amendment or whether we're going back to the substantive motion.
Ms Stevens, can you...
If I can, I've seconded the amendment on the basis that Councillor Lawrence is not willing to accept the
amendment,
change.
yes.
So if Councillor Rennie is still wants to put that amendment, I'm prepared to second the amendment.
Yes. So Councillor Greco has seconded the proposed amendment. Councillor Rennie, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think that we have standards and expectations for a reason in relation to building. We have preferred heights because they have been taken to our community, they have been debated in this chamber, they have been considered as part of our planning scheme. And I think there's very little point in having preferred heights, neighbourhood character and other things if we ignore them or say it's okay for people to go a little bit over. So on that basis, I would like to propose the amendment that we bring this building back in scale so that it meets the preferred height in the area. That's documented, it's there for a reason, and I think if we allow a bit of creep to go from 6 to 7, next time it'll be 7 to 8, and then it will be 8 to 9, and where does that creep stop? So this area has been identified as appropriate for 6, and that's why I propose this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Greco?
Yeah, look, just along the lines of what Councillor Rennie has said, I think we need to be much more stringent in applying the structure plans that are applicable to that particular area, and I think that whilst the language says desired heights, I'm quite sure that in the consultation process that took place in developing those structure plans, that those heights were intended to be maximum heights. Even though we don't have the language to say that they ought to be mandatory heights, I think the overwhelming intention, both from the community's perspective and I think from council's perspective, is that we need to be stringent and as stringent as we can in applying those heights as stipulated by the structure plan.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of including the amendment?
Of the amendment?
Of the amendment being included in the recommendation? All those against? Sorry, I'm confused.
I'll abstain.
Abstain? So that's lost. So we'll go back to the substantive motion as moved by Councillor Lawrence.
Sorry, can I just get clarification? Was that 4-4?
4 against and 1
And
abstain.
1 abstention. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Does anyone else wish to speak before we close the debate?
Well,
I think you.
what have we now got? I'm
So now we're
confused by this process.
No, so now we are back to the substantive motion which you moved, which is the officer recommendation. Does anyone else wish to speak to that motion?
Look, I'll speak in favour of the substantive motion, and I'll do so on the basis that whilst I appreciate the strong arguments put forward by Councillor Rennie, I think we've got a pretty unique situation here where we've had an applicant that's shown good faith with the process, and whilst I have been a staunch advocate for maximum heights, that's not actually what we have in place here right now, and we have what is well beyond what is required by the planning scheme with the addition of the water-sensitive urban design elements. I think we need to give credit where credit's due. This application has not attracted lots of objections. In fact, the only objections are from 2 other commercial properties, neither of which are directly impacted upon this in any amenity concern whatsoever. So if we are serious about providing housing in places where it is appropriate to provide medium density and medium to even high density in this case, we need to take that responsibility seriously, and I'm prepared to support this application on the basis that the applicant has shown good faith. There hasn't been residential objections and in the immediate vicinity, and we've actually seen good faith in terms of council's preferred water-sensitive urban design. I'm confident if this ended up at VCAT, I'm pleased to think that it won't end up at VCAT, that this would end up being as per the officer recommendation. So I think all parties are going to be better off if we can commit this one, and on that basis I'm happy to support the substantive motion as it's listed.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Would you like to... Pardon?
Have I spoken already, or were you starting?
You did speak. Would you like to have a right of reply?
Look, I'm happy for this to be considered by council as officers have negotiated it through with the applicant, and obviously if there isn't the will for that motion, obviously happy to consider any foreshadow motion with a little bit more detail about the tidying up of the conditions. written out properly. I can certainly appreciate the points put forward by Councillor Rennie in terms of absolute heights. However, in some respects, the horse has already bolted at VCAT on this in terms of the development to the immediate south. So so I was happy to hear an approval of 6 rather than a refusal for 7, because my reading of this is we've got very little chance at VCAT to hold back 7 here, but we have got a chance to at least stop 8, and we have got a chance to include more advanced form of environmental controls than we already have approved through the planning scheme amendment process. So yes, it would be nice to have it limited at 6, but I think at this point this is a way to lock in something that's less than 8.
Thank you. I'll put that to the vote. So all those in favour of the officer recommendation as listed in the agenda? All those against? That the application has been supported. So the Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Item 5.2, application for planning permit at 18 Sheffield Street, Preston. Officers.
This application is for the construction of 5 dwellings on the land. 4 dwellings are double storey and 1 is single storey. 4 of the dwellings contain 2 bedrooms and are provided with a single garage each. 1 of the dwellings has 3 bedrooms and 2 car spaces in a tandem arrangement. 3 of the dwellings have ground floor open space areas and 2 dwellings provide reverse living accommodation with balcony open spaces. There are no restrictive covenants which apply to the land. The application was advertised and 21 objections were received. 6 of those objections received are from the local area. Objections are summarised on pages 42 through 43 of the agenda and responded to in detail on pages 43 through 46. The proposed development presents a contemporary form to Sheffield Street which draws on traditional design elements. Open space areas generally comply or exceed the Reece Code minimum, noting that there is a slight adjustment to the open space for dwelling 5 as per condition 1C of the recommendation. Upper levels are separated into 2 blocks, which allow for visual permeability through the site, and the rear dwelling is single storey. Although the side and rear setbacks comply with Reece Code, a condition of approval would require the upper level for dwelling 4 to be further set back from the adjoining property to the north. Therefore, approval is recommended subject to conditions outlined on pages 36 through 40 of the agenda, including condition 1F, which increases the setback of dwelling 4 from the adjoining open space to the north, and condition 1C, which adjusts the open space to dwelling 5.
Thank you. I have no speakers registered for this item, so Councillor. Would you like to tip the applicant? Yes. If you could state your name, and you will have 5 minutes to speak to us.
So, good evening. Just to touch on the location, so obviously residential area, lots of medium density multi-unit development that's occurred over many years in that location. And it's well served by local open space. There's Grey Reserve within about a minute's walk away, and there's other reserves that are taken by. It's near the Regent Village Shopping Centre, which is an established shopping precinct, and well served by tram and bus, which are in a couple of minutes walk, and the Regent Station train, which is 10 to 12 minutes walk away. So quite well served. It's noted that about 15 minutes walk away to the Preston Central Activity Area. It's an area of high activity, as everybody knows. So hence why there's probably been a lot of development over the years, because of that location being quite well served. To continue on, the development itself of five dwellings has been through a process with further information request, which resulted in some changes. remains no change to the crossover servicing the development, so on-street parking remains unaffected. The crossover is changing location, but basically the amount of frontage that the crossover takes up doesn't change. There are no garages visible from the frontage. These two roads that will face the streets. All the car parking is located behind those building lines. There's a large front setback of 9 metres, which helps maintain the P3 characteristics that allows for quite a lot of vegetation and front setback. 3 of the dwellings have ground floor open space, as mentioned, which again allows for planting of canopy trees and other small vegetation. 2 dwellings that employ a terrace on first floor. These 2 terraces are well above standard, 15 square metres and 13 square metres respectively, with a pretty clear north aspect that allows for good views and sunlight and allows for a break through the dwelling overall development. There's also service yards for those 2 dwellings, which are important aspects if able to store bins and other services to not have them located where people are going to spend time on those terraces. There's high compliance with all of clause 55. There's a couple of extra conditions put in about screening and some setbacks which go above that, and having been through them, there's no worries from our point of view about implementing those condition changes. And in terms of the objections, again, the majority were from data and only a handful in the area. Nothing that hasn't realistically been covered by the officer in their report. There's a diversity of dwellings, smaller footprints, there's appropriate parking for residents, and the characteristic has been quite well met from a reasonable assessment by the officer. So there's nothing further to add from that point of view. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillors, questions? No questions? There's an officer recommendation in front of us. Do I have a mover?
I'm happy to move the officer recommendation.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Happy to second it.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie?
Yes, I think that we should note that this development meets both the standard and the objective in relation to compliance, and that's not something we've seen a lot of. And on that basis, I think we should accept this development as being fine, and I note that it takes up 43% of the building footprint of the land. That's not pushing the envelope in the way others do, and yeah, I suppose I commend the developer for stopping at that point and presenting us with this.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy?
Oh, I've got nothing else to add. So.
Are there any further speakers? No? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of the officer recommendation? And that's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Item 5.3, application for a planning permit at 155 Gooch Street, Thornbury. Officers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This application seeks approval to develop 3 double-storey dwellings. There are each are equal 2 bedrooms. 2 parking spaces are provided for the 3-bedroom dwellings. An open space for each of the dwellings is provided in the form of ground floor open space accessible to the living area. The subject land is located in the General Residential Zone 2 and has a total area of 641 square metres. The application has been advertised with 18 objections received. These are detailed and responded to on pages 58 to 64 of the officer's report. As set out in the officer's report, the proposal fails to respond appropriately to the neighbourhood character and presents the street as a development dominated by garage structures and driveways. The application is therefore recommended for refusal based on the grounds set out on page 57 of the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Objector Mr Richard Piola registered to speak. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. Firstly, thanks for the opportunity to speak here tonight. I'm here, I guess, in two capacities this evening. Firstly, I am the residence, one of the residents directly adjacent to this property, so there's some direct impacts that I feel this development will have on our residents. But also I'm here more as a general voice for spokespeople for a lot of other members who are in the neighbourhood and the immediate area of this proposed development. So I guess firstly, as a directly affected party, I just want to reiterate my personal concerns with several key aspects of the development proposal. Those that are specifically non-compliant with various aspects of the Darabin planning scheme. These include the setback of the boundary wall with our property, which is too close to our property by about 40 centimetres or so, and needs to be moved back to be compliant with the planning scheme. In doing so, I think the way that I view the development, a setback of that nature could have significant impacts on what we're able to do given the current design or layout of the development. As a direct result of this boundary wall being too close, it has an impact on the daylight of habitable windows along that side of the property. Excuse me. There's also concern or non-compliance with overlooking into our backyard and several backyards of the neighbouring properties. And particular mention has been made of the site services. The way that they're indicated on the development is there doesn't seem to be a reasonable way of achieving, in particular, the placement of all the recycling and the garbage bins in the rear of the property. There's only access from the rear of the property to the front of the property through the residences themselves. There's no external access ways. So this would mean all the bins would have to either be moved through the residences to be put out, or they'd have to be located at the front of the property, in which case there's not sufficient room to be placed there. And with the proposal of 3 residences, we've got a couple of 9 bins that need to be located in a very small area. I guess going on, just as a general representative of the neighbourhood and as a spokesperson for many of the other residences, I just wanted to take this opportunity to express concerns to do with the proliferation or the increase in this type of developments in areas such as Goose Street and the surrounding streets. In particular, the fact that many of these developments don't take into account the character of the neighbourhood in terms of things such as adequate landscaping, size and scale and visual bulk of the developments, the integration of the design with the surrounding residences and the character of the street. One of the important concerns is that of parking. Gooch Street, because of the existing design of many of the residences, is quite reliant on on-street parking, and the removal of a single family home and replacement with 3 units severely impacts that. And I guess in summary, just the large number of objections that this development receives, I think, sends a clear message that residents in our area now are concerned with the increase of developments of this type. And as I said, I think it's important to note that we're sacrificing a single family home for a medium density development that has a severe, not severe, but considerable impact on the amenity and the character of the neighbourhood.
Thank you, Mr Piola. You may return to your seat in the gallery. Questions? Councillor McCarthy.
I'm happy to move the recommendation, but before I do, I just wanted to check through you to our officers. I couldn't see any reference in the points of refusal to the side setback issue that the objector referred to, nor the issue of overlooking, and I just wanted to get an officer's response before amending it.
Mr Rudd.
Through you, Madam Chair, there's certainly a mention there, condition A-B refers to impact on daylight, so we're talking habitable room windows. and that's as a consequence. There's also a reference in condition AA refers to the boundary-to-boundary setback and configuration through the design.
So, if I can just clarify, the particular issues of overlooking that were described, I don't see them specified in there. I'm just wondering if officers would have any objection to overlooking being added to point A or to another point as listed.
Overlooking is generally very easily addressed. Therefore, the tribunal then supports an overlooking around, because it either requires screening different of the mind to approve an application, or when an application goes to the tribunal and council has refused it, council is required to provide the tribunal with what they call draft conditions. Conditions that if VCAT were to approve the application, these are the conditions that would apply, and that's when also conditions related to overlooking. So it's never a substantive ground.
Thank you for that explanation. On that basis, happy to move the recommendation as it's listed.
Do you have a question, or you're seconding? Yes, Councillor Williams.
Kindly through you, Madam Chair, regarding two crossovers, I believe that we tend to only have a crossover policy of one, and in this case we have two. Is it because of the width of the property?
Through you, Madam Chair, the standard in the planning scheme allows up to 40% of the frontage to be used for driveway crossings. The issue with this application is not so much the crossings at street level, it's what it does from there between the front of the building setback and the front boundary. You'll notice that most of that area, which is traditionally along Goose Street, garden space is occupied with hard stand areas, and that's what makes it incongruous with the neighbourhood character.
Thank you. Are there any further questions, or do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy.
Look, I think the officers have made the case for refusal very clear, as has the objector. I don't really have a lot to add. I would like to just respond though to the general point that the objector made on behalf of the community in relation to these types of applications, and I would probably echo the sentiment that unfortunately we at this stage don't have any power to refuse an application like this before the advertising stage, because the Planning and Environment Act allows for such an application to be made. However, it probably points to a general deficiency in the strength of neighbourhood character, and also other elements that are included in the refusal that they aren't taken more seriously in the planning scheme and in the planning system, and that's an issue which I think it's worth giving a response, and hopefully our officers can also give a response to the objector about the broader context that we have to deal with here. But I'm really pleased that we've refused this, or proposing to refuse it, and hopefully in time the planning scheme and the Planning Act can actually be tightened and clarified so that we don't get these sorts of speculative, inappropriate developments in these locations.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie.
Nothing to add, thanks.
Any other speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of refusing this application? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to refuse the planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAT. Notices detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week. I'll just take a moment while people file out. Item 5.4, application for planning permit at 272 Gilbert Road, Preston. Officers.
This proposal is for use of the land as a medical centre. It will have, it's proposed to have one practitioner operating from the land at any one time, with one additional staff member on site. Hours of operation are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, and 3 parking spaces are provided on the site. There are no restrictive covenants which apply to the land. The application was advertised and 5 objections were received. Objections are summarised on page 76 of the agenda and responded to in detail on pages 76 through 77 of the agenda. With one practitioner operating at any one time, the planning scheme requires 5 parking spaces to be provided. 3 parking spaces are provided on the land, which is a shortfall of 2 spaces. However, of those on the land, 2 of those spaces are in a tandem arrangement, which really makes them only suitable for staff parking. The other space is an accessible space. As a result, the majority of patrons would need to park on street. Parking in Collins Street is restricted on the south side, and therefore parking would be pushed to the north side of Collins Street or onto Gilbert Road, which also has clearways enforced. It's noted that there are a number of medical centres already in the local area, and whilst that is in and of itself is not a reason to refuse an application, because the planning scheme does not control uses in that way. However, what it does mean is that the community benefit of an additional medical centre would not outweigh, in this instance, the parking issues caused by it. So if there were no medical centres in the area, the balance might tip in the other direction. Therefore, refusal is recommended based on the grounds outlined on page 75 of the agenda.
Thank you. I have Jack from Rooms with Style registered to speak on behalf of the applicant. Hello. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. So, in response to the officer's report, we would like to clarify to the committee that our client's surgery practice is a specialist practice and not a GP or general practice. And this is important in 3 key ways. Firstly, there are no other specialists in the area, only 2 GPs, a pathology clinic and a pharmacy. So in order to access the same specialist medical service that our client's surgery provides, patients will need to make a much more inconvenient hospital trip to either the Northern Hospital or the Austin Hospital. Secondly, the surgery actually complements rather than competes with the existing local general medical services. For example, it is anticipated that the local GP would refer their patients to our client's surgery. Thirdly, the appointment times for each patient at the surgery are much longer than that of a GP. So as a reference, each surgery appointment is typically 30 to 45 minutes long versus just 5 to 7 for a GP. So, and because there is only one practitioner operating at any one time, there will only be a maximum of 20 patients to be seen on any one day in total. So furthermore, due to this limited nature of patient appointments per day, the surgery is able to implement a system whereby the disabled car park will be kept free should there be a disabled patient who requires it. But otherwise, it can also be made available to be used by all regular patients as well. And this particular system has been applied in our client's other practice in Footscray and has been shown to work well. This means that for the majority of the time, only one on-street car park will be required by our client's surgery. And based on our traffic engineer's report, there was a minimum of 86 vacant on-street car spaces available during the survey period. So the impact of our client's surgery for most of the time is 1 out of 86, and at most 2 out of 86. So in summary, we believe that that unlike existing general medical centres in the area, the traffic impact of our client's specialist surgery will be very minimal, and at the same time the surgery will contribute significantly to improving the medical amenity and convenience provided to the local community.
I'm actually new on my breast cancer, bowel cancer, and general surgery in North Health, as well as Royal Law School in North Park. So, as you know, there's a lot of development sort of up for applications and the density of the small areas of criminal events. You see that in the public hospital, especially in Queensway public clinic, especially at the moment, you wait a couple of hours. Now that's frustration to the patient. A few years ago, I was consulted on a specialist clinic up on High Street. I'm not sure if you even know that closed down. The surgeon retired. I wasn't in a position to take over at the point I was asked. I am now in a position to start my own practice. And so I do believe that this actually provides the community, having seen where patients come from the public hospital that I work, it would benefit them. It would be a gateway for them to get on back onto the waiting list. If you imagine you needing a hernia repair, not only can you wait 3 months to see surgery at the public hospital, and then you go on the waiting list to be another 6 months. I have the ability, if you see me here, I have the ability to put you on the waiting list in a public hospital where I work, which is northern, like 20 minutes up the road. And that bypasses the clinic that a patient needs to attend or wait for in the public system. And we don't have that facility here in the present.
Thank you. You may return to your seats in the gallery. Thanks. I have 2 objectors here registered to speak, so I'll invite Michael and Helen Glenatis. Thank you. You have 2 minutes and 30 seconds to speak. Yes. So I have a second objector. Yes, and so I have Alex.
I'm happy for them to take a couple more minutes. If you want.
Really quickly, I'm going to speak on a couple of objectives. I'll just read it out.
Okay, thanks.
First of all, we object to the granting of a permit for a medical practice at 272 Gilbert Road, Preston, on the corner of Collins Street, which is our street, on the following grounds. 1, the said property does not comply with the on-premise parking requirement guidelines, which requires 5 on-site parking for the first health worker, and then 3 on-site parking for every other. Please note also that the 2 nearby clinics have on-site parking. That's the Bruce Street Medical Centre at 279 Gilbert Road and Gilbert Clinic at 254 Gilbert Road. They provide on-site parking. I don't know why it can change now, but there should be no waiver of the parking guidelines in this case due to the parking restrictions already in place in Collins Street, namely the existing permit-only parking on the south side. 3, Collins Street is already congested with on-street parking from residents from Gilbert Road, which has clearways in place. Second, other outer suburban commuters catching trams to work and leaving their cars parked in Collins Street. And C, students from the Melbourne Polytechnic College also use Collins Street. Also, worshippers from the mosque. It's a very convenient place next to Cramer Street. Also, entry. This is the one that worried me. Entry into Collins Street from Gilbert Road is often difficult because there is a vehicle, especially if there's a vehicle approaching to exit, due to the cars parked on the north side. And with the medical practice, if there's cars parked on the south side as well using the permit, then it's really going to be difficult for the head-on entry-exit type of problem, which is like an accident waiting to happen. So we'd like to reduce the amount of flow into our street. There's a lot of older people and children in the street, and a lot of people. It's quite a residential street with older people and children. Yeah, and it's difficult for me to get in and out of my driveway.
Thank you. Alex, Sir Arcus, would you like to? Sorry.
I'm speaking more on behalf of the Gilbert Road side, so I'm a resident of the property next door. And just to reiterate the same sort of concern, there's already huge safety concerns with us reversing out of our own driveway, because directly in front of the proposed address at 272, there's a post box there as well, which is no standing. So at the moment, myself and my mother-in-law, who lives on the same block, we have problems getting out, because not only do we have to consider that no standing area, but the tram stop is only 100 metres away up the road. So every few minutes, there is a natural bank up of traffic that
this is just exaggerated with the fact that the north side of Collins Street is always full when turning from Gilbert Road, which is no central concerns. And also, I just want to reiterate that for myself, it's important to respect those sort of guidelines that the council have in place in regards to the amount of parking spaces for clinics, and that even though the applicant made some good points and wanted to sort of speak on behalf of the good that they can do to people, which I support as well, I don't think that it's the correct place, and I think that I don't think we should waver from that for that specific reason, because at the end of the day, those rules are in place to protect the current residents, and at the moment, it's becoming unsafe and too busy, and it's feeling less and less like a community if we keep opening up clinics. And yes, they are different sort of clinics, but the fact is that the clinics are literally, there's one 81 metres away, there's another one 220 metres away, there's a milk bar across the road that's just gone bust. There's another clothing place that has a 3-story proposed. So we're completely losing the community feel, and the more we approve these things, the less and less our homes are worth that we put years into. And like I've busted my chops for 6 years saving to build my house, that unit, and I don't want to, even though I sympathise with people helping people in clinics, the fact of the matter is that that's a family property and it's been there for 40 plus years. And now this does not comply with parking restrictions, and it's impossible to police that.
Thank you. Your time's up now. Thank you. You may resume your seat in the gallery. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Amir?
Yes, I've got several questions. The first of which is, can we get some more information about the specialist services provided at the clinic, in terms of what those services are that differ from others in the area?
So I don't think you've got a best area.
So, sorry, the question is to the officers.
I don't, if it is possible, it may be better to direct that question to the applicant, because from a planning perspective, the nature of those services are actually not what we consider.
Mr. Newman, would you like to answer the question? Yeah, briefly.
Yeah, so there's no, like I mentioned before, there's actually no specialist. There was one specialist clinic which closed down now 3 years ago.
So the question was, what
services do you provide?
Okay. So I'm a breast cancer surgeon, so I provide surgeries for patients with breast cancer. I'm a thyroid cancer surgeon for patients with thyroid cancer, and I'm a general surgeon, so your gallbladders, appendix hernias, colonoscopy, etc. So they're my service. Now, we anticipate an endocrinologist, but I'd say it's only one practitioner at a time. They will provide diabetic services to the area. Now, I don't think there is actually people from here I know are going to Essendon to see an endocrinologist.
Thank you. Thanks. Councillor Mead, did you have another question?
I have two further questions. I'll ask them both together. Through you, Madam Mayor, to the officers. The first is confirmation of whether there'll be any external change to the current built form. And my second question is whether, and this may be outside the scope of what information available, but whether you have any information on the expected impact for the change in purpose of the building, for example, around noise or pedestrian traffic and so forth.
In terms of the changes proposed are not extensive. Well, what is currently a backyard will be the parking area, and my understanding is that accessible paths will need to be built around to enable a ramp and the like to enable access. In terms of noise, well, the noise increase of a business is always going to be greater than that of a residence, except that they peak at different times. So a residence might be more noisy on weekends if people have, friends over or the like, whereas a business is more likely to create its noise during the week. So.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor McCarthy.
Look, I'm just, I suppose following on from Councillor Amir's first question, I'm just wondering, in relation to this report, the report refers to this as a medical practice, but what we've just heard in the submission from the applicant is that it's a specialty service. I'm wondering, through you to our officers, whilst that may not be a consideration for the planning matters, it may give us some information in regards to the traffic and parking demand. I'm wanting to get a sense of what the what consideration officers in the transport area might give to different types of practices in this context. When there's a specialist practice, I'd note that there are along Gilbert Road other specialist practices in the psychology space that have been supported and allowed. So I'm just wanting to understand where the distinction is between a generalist medical practice and a specialist medical practice, given that the parking demand as submitted, and that's open to debate, but as submitted would not be the same as a GP.
My understanding is that the objection has come, so council's transport officers have assessed the application and did object on the basis of parking, and I think that contextually it relates to the conditions on Collins Street as well as those on Gilbert Road. So I could imagine that there are probably other sites along Gilbert Road where either more accessible off-street parking is provided, that mitigates that issue, or there is more accessible on-street parking. And I think that the fact that there is a permit zone in Collins Street shows that there actually is an issue with parking in that location.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
If I could ask, through you, the Chair, to the officers, is there any potential from a design perspective to change the layout to increase the parking capacity on the site?
Question.
The site is quite, I don't believe so from using the existing building, which we do generally encourage because from a general character perspective, maintaining that existing house allows, if in the future a medical centre were to leave, that it could be readapted back into the community as well. The property is not as big as, it appears to be that the property is the existing house of an old dual occupancy, so the grounds around it are actually much smaller than they might be if it was a regular house lot, and in fact if it was the original regular house lot, probably the full complement of car parking could have been able to be provided, but it appears to me that the applicant has used what space there is to provide those 3 parking spaces, and given that the accessible spaces need extra support.
Councillor McCarthy.
I just wanted to test something through you, Chair, to our officers, whether there is provisional scope with an application like this, given the new information that's been provided, for us to defer this on the basis of allowing the applicant and the objectors, in conjunction with officers, to look at alternative either layout on site or parking arrangements. What I'm concerned about primarily is that this ends up at VCAT and one side wins and one side loses, and no one's, some people are very unhappy. Whether there is scope to look at alternative layout to the site, other parking arrangements, other options. I'm wanting to understand from a process point of view, if we were to defer that on that basis, whether officers would be in a position to facilitate the coming together of both parties to look at what else is possible, given the new information that we've received tonight, which is not covered in the report, which is pertinent to the issue.
Officers?
Look, I think that decision does rest with the committee. Certainly it's possible that process can be undertaken. As to what possible outcome it could create or whether or not it could actually result in an outcome, that's not something that I can speculate on. I think the other thing to remember is that with these processes, council is not able to bind parties in the same way that say, for instance, the tribunal has. I mean, we can make decisions or even conditions, but agreements are very difficult to enforce if an agreement is actually reached. But certainly, if that was something that the committee felt strongly enough to explore, that's something we could attempt to facilitate.
Councillor Lawrence?
Yeah, just one question about car parking and crossovers for the officers. Under our current crossover policy, I suppose Vic Roads comes into this to a degree, but if you could answer this, could an extra crossover be supported on Collins Street and a single crossover supported on Gilbert Road on this property?
I'm not sure if another crossing could be supported on Collins Street or Gilbert Road any closer to, the problem is the proximity of the site to the corner.
Yep.
So I'm not entirely certain, but I would think that, and also on Gilbert Road, it would, you could only reverse out, which is probably not something that we would support so close to the corner. Reversing out on Collins Street may not be such an issue, but again, the crossing is probably, the existing crossing is as far as it can practically be from the corner.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move the officer recommendation.
Is there a seconder? No? Is there a... Yes, Councillor Williams?
Through you, Madam Chair, is it possible to, I don't know what the parking arrangements is on Collins Street itself, but is it possible to allocate a couple of car spots on Collins Street for the medical centre, similar to that of like a residential permit parking for staff?
That's an answer that I can't provide to you without actually consulting with Council's transport engineers, because again, I'm not certain about, given that that side of the street is actually the side with the permit zone on it, how appropriate it would be on the side of the road, and what capacity there actually is for the provision of spaces given the site's proximity to the corner. So if you wish, we could go away and research that answer and provide it, but I'm sorry, I can't provide that to you.
On that
Thank
case,
you.
I would like to propose a alternative to propose to, as Councillor Trent McCarthy was suggesting earlier, to go away and look at other alternatives regarding parking, because I don't feel comfortable on making a decision on this tonight.
I've got words, if I can put them forward. Happy for Councillor Williams to move it, but if it's of assistance.
Yes, so just to clarify that Councillor Lawrence moved the last motion, but it lapsed due to there not being a seconder. Councillor Williams, I'll allow Councillor McCarthy to read out the words that he's drafted for that motion.
The words would be that Planning Committee defer the application to enable the applicant and objectors to explore, with assistance from officers, council officers, potential design, parking and traffic management options, given the specialist medical practices may not have the same parking impact as outlined in the report.
Yep.
And that's
Councillor Williams, are you happy with those words?
Just for that purpose, so that it will come back to us.
And Councillor McCarthy?
Happy to second that.
Happy to second. Thank you. Councillor Williams, would you like to speak to that?
Well, as we've all obviously struggled with this particular one, we don't normally turn over officers' refusal. But in this case, I think a few things has come to light regarding it being not just a normal medical centre, but a specialty medical centre for those in greater need. I don't know if anybody's had a situation, but having these specialty centres is far and in between getting to them. If we can come up with an alternative or some other way that fits for both parties, I think this could be a win-win for everybody. That's pretty much.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy?
I'll just read the motion just so everyone's clear, and then I'll just say a couple of words. That Planning Committee defer the application to enable the applicant and objectors to explore with officers potential redesign, parking and traffic management options given the specialist medical practices as outlined by the applicant may not have the same demand on local parking provision as listed in the report.
Thank you.
That's really the point here, is that I don't feel that this report, unfortunately, gives us the information that we need at this stage. I'm sympathetic to the concerns of both parties, in fact, because I appreciate that something like a medical centre on the corner of your street can be a challenging concept. I've got one on the corner of my street, and I know the parking overflow that occurs. But that's a specialist medical practice that no longer only has 1 or 2 spots on site. Councillor Rennie and I have both been looking at the maps here, and I can see potential redesign of the site. What I would be more concerned about if I was a resident in this street is the potential consequence of this not going ahead and the site potentially becoming another 3-storey corner site development, which is going to have all sorts of other parking implications for residents. So sometimes it's the better the devil you know. That's not to say we should necessarily support this, but we should explore what's an option, and that's why I think it's worth both parties having that opportunity with our officers to see what else is possible. One of those things may be the pursuit of improved parking controls in Collins Street and surrounding streets as well, to help manage the process more generally. But I would like to think that the report itself does not provide all the information that we needed, and on that basis I'd like to support the deferral.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Lawrence?
Yes, I'd speak against the deferral motion. Look, I think it's quite clear in terms of the parking pressure on Collins Street that we need to apply our parking provisions, and those parking provisions are fairly clear about the 5 spaces. Residents have been fairly clear about that being the principal grounds for their objection. So if the deferral motion was to defer things to avoid going to VCAT to resolve the 5 spaces, then I would support the deferral motion. But a deferral motion is seeking to define the business based on some verbal assertions tonight. But in terms of the number of clients and all that, that really needs to be regulated by condition, if it can, and I'm not sure it can. So I'll come back to the issue the block is cut in half. If it wasn't cut in half, there'd be enough parking there. So we're actually overusing the site, and unless it can come back with 5 car parks, I don't think we should be approving it.
Thank you. Councillor Newton?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to speak in favour of deferring the motion. I understand the residents' concern around parking, but I believe that this, with the information that we have that's come to light about the specialist nature of the clinic, I think this could benefit the community rather than if a client that lives nearby has to travel to Essendon. I think having a specialist clinic nearby could benefit the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Greco?
Yeah, look, just very quickly, just picking up on Councillor Lawrence's point, is that I think there could be some potential in terms of the redesign of the site, in terms of trying to increase the parking, and it even could be is that there could be some alterations could be considered by the applicant in relation to the actual building, to see whether some changes can be made to it to actually allow for greater parking, or the access to greater parking. So, look, let's explore that. I mean, it's not binding. Let the applicant and the objectors consider that. Obviously, it's not going to be binding on them. And if an application, if something comes back to us with a happy compromise, that'd be good. If it doesn't, well, then council will have to reconsider it later on. But let's give it a chance.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Amin.
I'd like to speak in support of the deferral for the reasons given, particularly around the benefit to the community of having a service like this. I'd also note that previously in this chamber we have provided waivers for parking in circumstances where locations are close to public transport, where this site is. It's very close to it, the Gilbert Road tram and a tram stop, and also where additional bike parking has been provided, as is the case for this development.
Thank you. Any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote to defer this application. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Okay, item 5.5, application for planning permit at 36 Kelsby Street Reservoir. Officers.
Thank you. This application proposes the construction of 6 double-storey dwellings. Dwellings 1 and 6 will have ground level open spaces, and dwellings 2 to 5 will provide reverse living accommodation with balcony open spaces. Dwelling 1 contains 3 bedrooms and has been provided with 2 car spaces in a tandem arrangement. And dwellings 2 to 6 will each have 2 bedrooms and a single garage. There are no restrictive covenants which apply to the land. The application was advertised and 6 objections were initially received, with 1 of these objections subsequently withdrawn. 5 objections remain. Those objections are summarised on page 91 of the agenda and responded to in detail on pages 92 and 93 of the agenda. The development presents a traditional form to Kelsby Street. Upper levels are set back in accordance with or in excess of Res Code requirements, particularly where adjacent secluded private open spaces on adjoining properties. Shading impacts are within Res Code standards, and the development generally displays a high degree of compliance with Res Code standards. There are only 2 standards where the development complies with the objective rather than the standard, and that is the front setback, which is, whilst being slightly forward of the 2 adjoining setbacks, is in keeping with the range of setbacks within the street, which do vary. And the other is the wall on boundaries objective, which, where they are, tend to abut sidages or simultaneously constructed walls on boundary rather than direct secluded private open space areas. Therefore, approval is recommended subject to conditions set out on pages 84 through 90 of the agenda.
Thank you. I have Pauline and Con Maltzis to speak on behalf of the applicant. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here tonight as the owner of this property and as the applicant town planner. My husband, Ron, who's obviously not here tonight, and I'll accept the responsibility and let him run the quiz. So, I don't know what to lose. I'm not going to take up too much time or address the merits of the proposal with all due respect, but I will say that if your decision was to be based on merit and reason, there would be no reason to refuse the proposal. If you were of a mind to base your decision on the merits of the application as discussed, which I'm sure you will, I consider it fair to provide you with an opportunity if you have any requests or questions or would like to consider any changes. And I would like to just correct one point that the planning officer made in relation to the front setback, that the dwelling is forward of the 2 adjoining properties. It's actually in line with the one to the south and staggers up to the property to the north. So it provides a transition. I just want to give a little bit of a personal background, which may or may not be relevant, and I will use up some time for this. I could say that my husband and I are a team. I create and produce the vision together with the architect, while my husband, who is the builder for our projects, brings my vision to life to create an outstanding work form in design and construction. I could also say that we are ratepayers and have retained the majority of the few townhouses that we have constructed, and therefore have a continuing interest in state in the City of Darwin. Our intention is also to retain this entire development because that is our plan as the new owners for this site. However, I also don't believe this will be your decision. So I will say the following. This application, again with all due respect, should not be here before the committee tonight. There are actually 5 objections, but not all within 200 metres. One is 230 metres away from the site, so there are 4 within 200 metres. And that is the objector at number 6, Kelsby Street Reservoir, the other end of the street. Therefore, on the basis of process, I can expect the decision would need to be made here tonight. Nevertheless, here tonight. The simple fact is that if this or any of these objectives have been included in my proposal, they will also be speaking here tonight. And that disappoints me a little bit because I'm here tonight to represent myself, and I don't feel that I should If your decision is to be based on consultation with objectors, then my efforts in this regard should be rewarded and probably in fact applauded. My only immediate objecting neighbour was that at number 38, and they have withdrawn their objection, and happily so. After reviewing the plans together with the husband and wife, I actually also received an apology from them for their submission. I'll put it up front and say that the information they provided me, although disappointing, is that one particular party provided others to object. Again, we're looking at. This does not align with the integrity of the justice system, nor the spirit or intent of the delegated authority. And it does bother me at this time of year when I'm trying to enjoy the spirit of business. I will also point out that two of the objectors, being a unit to the rear, so my property backs onto another property which faces the adjoining street. The objector is from a middle unit, not one which directly abuts my property, and the same with the 8 flats to the south. It's the flats on the southern side of that site. I did approach those objectors directly, door knocking a couple of times, and what I can say is that they were not able to communicate with me either in language or on the topic due to their lack of knowledge or understanding of the objection submitted. And I won't further comment on that. 2 to 3 attempts were made by myself to discuss and contact the objector opposite, Zurich 1, and there was one objector 2 doors to the north. Now, no outcomes or responses were achieved, although the discussions with those were polite. I'm naturally hoping for a fair and reasonable decision tonight, although again I do reiterate that there are 4 objections within 200 metres of the site, not 5. And I'll leave that at that point. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? There's an officer recommendation in front of us. Do I have a mover?
Can I just get clarification, sorry, from our officers, just in relation to the objection that was withdrawn, just whether that was in relation to any changes that were made, or on what basis that officers understand that occurred?
Yes, I'll just, sorry, if you just bear with me, I'll draw your attention to the relevant part of the agenda. So page 93 of the agenda, just at the bottom of the page, under the heading of withdrawn objection. So after the discussions between the applicant and the objector, the applicant requested that particular changes to the plans be made, and that was a 2-metre high fence to the north boundary secluded by open space in units 1, 2 and 3, and a 1.7 metre wide screen to the balcony of unit 3. So those, given that those changes are acceptable, they're included as conditions
Gotcha.
on the approval.
Thank you. Do I have a mover for the officer's recommendation? Or an alternate motion?
I'd like to make an alternate motion.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie.
I move an alternate motion that Council refuse the application with grounds as follows, and this has been submitted earlier in the day. The proposal fails to satisfy the objectives clause 2202 of the Neighbourhood Character of Darabin Planning Scheme and the design objectives of the Darabin Neighbourhood Character Study and Precinct Guidelines 2007 in terms of inadequate opportunity for landscaping, excessive paving, inadequate setbacks, inadequate articulation and visual bulk, largely due to the reverse living typology that is proposed. The building height and bulk are inconsistent with neighbourhood character and impact unreasonably on the amenity of adjoining properties. The proposal does not meet the objectives at clause 55 of the Darabin Planning Scheme in particular. Clause 55.021, neighbourhood character. The proposal is inadequate in terms of inadequate opportunity for landscaping, excessive paving, inadequate setbacks, inadequate articulation and visual bulk. Clause 55.02/2, residential policy. The proposal is contrary to the local planning policy framework, including Council's municipal strategic statement. C, clause 5503-4, street setback. The proposed front setback does not comply with the standard and would have a detrimental impact on the streetscape character. D, clause 5503-2, building height. The height of the development will result in the presentation of overbearing and unreasonable visual bulk to the street and adjoining properties and does not allow adequate transition from neighbouring single-storey dwellings. E, clause 5503-8, landscaping. There are insufficient opportunities within the front and side setbacks to provide meaningful landscaping. F, 5504-1, side and rear setbacks. There are inadequate side setbacks at ground floor level that do not allow for appropriate landscaping or separation from adjoining residential properties. G, 5504/2, walls on boundaries. The proposed walls on the northern boundary are not in accordance with the standard, fail to respect the neighbourhood character and will have a detrimental impact on the amenity of the adjoining property to the north. H, 5505/6, storage. The location of storage will detrimentally impact upon the usability of the car parking spaces provided. And I, 5506/1, design detail. The design of the development will result in the presentation of overbearing and unreasonable visual bulk to the street. Point 4, the proposal is poorly conceived, not site responsive, and is considered an overdevelopment of the site. 5, the proposal does not provide a visitor car parking space as required by clause 5506(5) of the Darabin Planning Scheme.
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Rennie, do you wish to speak to the motion?
I think that this is an overstretch on a block of land this size. I appreciate the applicant, what you're trying to do, and would be very happy to support 5 units on this block. We have earlier this evening seen a development on a block actually slightly larger than this that was for 5 units, and we supported that unanimously. I think that 6 is resulting...
Councillor Rennie, just if you address the councillors.
Sorry. 6 is resulting in the overdevelopment in the areas of non-compliance that we see, particularly in relation to walls built to the boundary, in relation to the reverse living and some of the other failures to meet the standard. And all of those, I believe, could be rectified if the applicant came back with a proposal for 5 units, which I would be very happy to support, and I hope that that's what the applicant will choose to do.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I think Councillor Rennie has articulated all the various areas and concerns associated with this application, and there are quite a few. And I think they all stem from the fact that we're trying to put 6 dwellings on a block of nearly 850 square metres, which is a really hard calculation to try and make. And as a result of that, we see that that it just does not fit the site on which it's been proposed on. So on that basis, I'm not prepared to support this application, and then I think if it were to come back to us with a reduced number of dwellings, I think it could be supportable.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Lawrence?
Yes, Madam Chair. Yeah, look, I think obviously this is an area of council's undertaking intensification, but the impact on internal amenity in terms of private open space to this application is far inferior to other applications, including some which are 4 and 5 in the area. So that really concerns me because it affects the future residents.
Thank you. Any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour to refuse this application? All those against? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to refuse this planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAT. Notices detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week. Item 5.6, application for planning permit at 186 Gilbert Road, Preston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This application seeks approval for a 4-storey mixed-use development containing a ground floor shop. There are 9 dwellings also. The 9 dwellings are comprised of 4 single-bedroom and 4 2-bedroom dwellings, and there is a single 3-bedroom dwelling. 10 car spaces are proposed in the basement configuration for each dwelling and the shop, noting that the 3-bedroom dwelling has a single car space. The development presents to Gilbert Road as a 3-storey building and 4 storeys at the rear due to the slope across the site. The subject land has an area of 525 square metres and is included in the commercial 1 zone. So there is strategic support, Madam Chair, for all redevelopment of this site. The application has been advertised with 3 objections being received. These are detailed and responded to on pages 108 through to 110 of the officer's report. This application is recommended for refusal. The design failing to respond appropriately to its context. Related to the site, there have been similar decisions in feedback that I know some councillors are familiar with. In St George's Road, where we've had a slope away from the site, where the massing has been assembled at the rear, where there are residential interfaces. In this case, the officer's assessment is that those amenity impacts are excessive with that visual bulk and the reduced setbacks to sensitive residential interfaces. For that reason, the application is recommended for refusal.
Thank you. I have Mr James Ballett, an objector, requesting to speak. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, councillors, I'm an AMBO, I'm a Motown planner, but I've done my best to try and understand the urban planning scheme that applies here. I understand it forms the basis and the policies under land use and development in the city of Darwin. I understand too that this is a slightly different zone, even though that it's mostly residential. It's a commercial zone, and it's clearly why the developers have bought this place in the first place. But this place looks like the Spirit of Tasmania party. We're the owners of the property just to the south, so in the shadow of the Spirit of Tasmania. And we object on several grounds. The amenity of the property, the overshadowing, the loss of daylight, the setbacks, the loss of privacy, and the reduced tenantability, if that's a word. So the size, bulk, form, appearance of the property is not in keeping with local native character. You're all familiar with this area south of Bell. It's an area full of clean bricks and white cream brick houses that are fairly probably important. This building towers over these. It towers over the buildings in Bell Street as well. Planned height of the building exceeds the standard, that's the maximum standard set out in the rest of almost 1 metre. The site coverage too grossly exceeds the rest code by 60%. There's nothing here that looks like a blade of grass. Proposed development will cause significant overshadowing of our residents to the south. In fact, the entire northern half of the house and backyard will no longer receive sunlight. The overshadowing here exceeds the res code as well. Complete loss of daylight will be realised by private living spaces in our residence. Our lounge room and dining room have several north-facing windows that won't receive light. I know the plans detail shadow diagrams set in March that come winter, the entire block will have no natural light. The land development seems to build on every square inch of this block, 580 metres square. They seem intent to build right up to our boundary. The res code reads that there's an existing building on both the abutting allotments facing Estate Street, and the site is not on a corner. The minimum setback from the front street is the average distance between the two buildings. Our property is 7.4 metres. The corner property is right on. So the average should be at least 3.7 metres back. The side setbacks are also grossly over proposed. The res code prescribes a setback of 1 metre plus 300 centimetres for every metre of height over 3.6 metres. up to 6.9 metres, plus 1 metre for every metre of height over 6.9 metres. Even a quick glance at these plans will prove this not to be the case. Proposed development will contribute to a significant loss of privacy due to overlooking of our residents by several of the apartments. The tenantability takes a hit thanks to the loss of neighbourhood amenity, the loss of privacy, the loss of natural light, the overshadowing, the setbacks. Couple that with the compromise of structure during this building. Our tenants are moving out. We'll have difficulty tenanting from that point, with exacerbated by the sheer loading of traffic in that single little cobblestone lane at the back, and the noise that 9 units will generate in that area of Preston. I'm all for building for the future. I'm all for moderated development. But building something like this that really belongs in East Melbourne is a bit absurd. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. You may resume your seat in the gallery.
Do you mind my wife?
Oh, of course, sorry.
I just quickly wanted to say, I mean, James has said it all really well, but the property, we fell in love with this property because of its character and its Rambling garden. That's why our tenants live in this property and why they love this property. By building this building next door to it, it compromises that completely. You know, and I think it's fine for a developer to characterise its own development. For it to change our property by its sheer size, I think is unacceptable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, do you have any questions?
Happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Second. Thank you, Councillor Mir. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Madam Chair, the officers have gone through the deficiencies in this application, which are many, but probably the most alarming one is the lack of setback in terms of res code to the rear, because these type of applications basically alarm the community, because if this type of built form is going to be built along transit corridors, we really will have a wholesale rejection of densification of transit corridors. We have gone through this exercise on other corridors and continue to push the principle that yes, the land is available there to be utilised on tram lines, but there needs to be a transition in respect to res code provisions and the residents at the rear. Obviously, you know, people still object to that because that has a setback, but this is just presenting a sheer cliff to those residents.
Thank you, Councillor Amir.
I guess this is a site where, by glancing at the address, seems like a good location for increased densification. It's very close to a major intersection. It's close to both the tram line and to Bell Station. But as soon as I saw the plans, I had a physical, visceral response to how I would feel if I were living next door. And it's not just some overshadowing at a small amount of the day. It's a complete obliteration of being able to enjoy the morning sun, reading a book in the backyard. That opportunity is gone, and I don't think that's reasonable for us to force onto anyone.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor McCarthy?
This is a rhetorical question, but how did this even get to advertising? It just fails dismally on so many fronts. It's what not to do. But I'm actually genuinely curious as to how this even got to the stage of being exhibited. It just seems we have not, as far as I can recall, designated this section of Gilbert Road for medium density in the scale that Councillor Lawrence alluded to, and it's staggering that an applicant might think that this would pass muster with the lack of even the strategic intent, which is clearly not there. So I'd also like to just acknowledge the very articulate submission that we just had from an objector, and the point that was made was, you know, this is not against development. This is about development being in the right places, and this is not the right place for something like this. I could see this well located in other sites, but certainly not here. And I think we need to. Hopefully, this becomes a development that you hold up and say what not to do. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Williams.
Apart from my fellow councillors that have already pointed out some issues, I believe that it really impacts habitable rooms and the basic impact of those those who want to just generally want to dry their clothes outside on a clothesline. If it's going to be overshadowed, even on a summer's day, let alone on a winter's day, they would never be able to get their clothes dried. So that to me is a basic thing that I think every human being is entitled to.
Thank you. Any other speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour to refuse this application? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to refuse the planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAT. Notices detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week. Moving on to item 5.7, 56 to 58 Elliott Street and 5 to 7 Tracy Street Reservoir.
The proposal is to redevelop the existing aged care facility, which contains 38 beds and 22 independent living units, with an 110-bed aged care facility contained within a double-storey building. 49 car parking spaces and a space for 2 buses are being provided on the site, as well as a loading bay and an ambulance bay. No covenants affect the land at 56 Elliott Street. However, some of the smaller lots fronting Tracy and Elliott Streets are affected by covenants, which prohibit the removal of stone, earth, clay, gravel or sand from the land, except for the excavation of foundations. But it also prohibits the development of the land for shops, laundry, factories, and for more than one dwelling house. The proposal does not breach the terms of the covenants, as those particular lots which are affected contain only car parking and vehicle/pedestrian access areas. This application was advertised and no objections were received. The proposal is to redevelop the existing aged care facility, increasing the number of beds on the land. The new building is well set back from adjoining properties, allowing for the provision of appropriate landscaping areas. The architecture is appropriate for this type of facility and contains durable materials. Any overlooking of adjoining properties is to be suitably screened. Communal facilities are provided for the residents in terms of both lounge areas, dining areas, courtyard areas, as you might expect of this type of facility. Car parking is provided in excess of the requirements of clause 5206 of the scheme. Although not strictly a planning consideration, it is noted that in the applicant's submission to council that they did write that although the level of accommodation is to be increased, they do not intend to disadvantage existing residents and intend to actually construct the development in 2 discrete stages to allow continuous occupation. The facilities are to be upgraded to meet modern standards and designed to cater for persons with dementia and related cognitive impairment. Approval is recommended subject to conditions outlined on pages 134 through 140 of the agenda.
Thank you. I have 2 speakers on behalf of the applicant registered to speak. So Mr. Lusayer and Mr. James Kelly. So you each have 2 minutes and 30 seconds to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors. We don't want to take up your time unnecessarily. The report is very favourable. There are no objections to the proposal after extensive consultation and advertising. It's obviously a very valuable facility being redeveloped. We appreciate the site's been used for 40 years for an aged care facility. This is just the next development phase in its career. I have with me James Kelly as well, who's the project architect. And we're really here if there are any questions about the proposal or if there are any issues that we can respond to. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly, no? Councillors, do you have any questions?
I just have one question.
Councillor Greco.
Look, I know that this application ticks a lot of boxes, but there's one question in relation to page 146. It talks about the plant platform, which is 3 metres above the roof level. Through you, Chair, to our officers, is there any opportunity to actually locate that plant platform elsewhere, so to avoid it exceeding the height limit?
You may want to ask that question of the architect, however, because I can't answer that specifically. However, the site is very large and the building itself is actually very large. So I would say that the increase of height is not actually one that's impactful on adjoining properties, and so I guess from an officer's perspective, it was not thought to be necessary to actually ask the applicants to explore that change because of both the large nature of the building and the quite generous setbacks that are provided. I think though that if you were wanting to pursue that, it is probably better to sort of ask the expert in the location of the plant.
Thank you.
Question.
Councillor Messina.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Do you currently have a dementia wing in the facility, and any respite beds currently in the facility? And are you looking at the extension holding dementia wing in the facility?
Sorry, if you just address it through the chair.
Oh, sorry.
So are you addressing the question to the applicant?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, certainly. So at the moment there are dementia residents within the facility, but it's not a specialised dementia care wing or ward within the facility. So the intention is to have a designated design dementia facility. And at the moment there is no respite component, but there is capability of adding a new design.
Okay, so you have no respite component at the moment?
No, at the moment the facility is fully occupied with long-term residents.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you.
Second.
Councillor Lawrence.
I get a chance.
Councillor Greco.
I'm happy to move the recommendation. I'm satisfied with the response that I got from our officers, so no need for you guys to add any points there. Look, it actually expands from 38 to 110, so and there's already existing double stories there, so we're not really going over and above. And I think, as we all recognise, that particularly in the northern end of our city, there is much need for the notion of ageing in place, and I think that this is what this proposal delivers within the allotted land. So I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'm happy to support the application given the high level of compliance, but while not a planning matter, I also note a feature of this is the staging of the project to enable existing residents to continue on, and that's a very important aspect because the residents here, as we've heard, are long-term residents and are in fact part of the community and do interact with the rest of the community, and there was a degree of anxiety when the development was first announced. So I think it's very good the council is supporting an applicant like this to improve and continue a service in this manner.
Yep.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Look, I'm going to speak in favour of this, and I'm going to note that the expansion of the facility and the increase in places is extremely welcome, and it's actually rare for us to consider a planning application which has such a clear social benefit in that sense that can be measured and identified in that way. And I suppose, and I won't move an additional point to the conditions, but I would hope that given the location and given the likely transition of some of our existing residents to this facility, that there might be some effort between both the applicant and other parts of council to look at how to incorporate some of the inclusive policies that council undertakes in its aged care services, given the complex social demographics that we have here in Darebin, both from a linguistically diverse community, but also a diverse arrangements from same-sex couples through to single people that have lived independently and are no longer. So it's not something we can condition, but certainly we can encourage is that model of social inclusion. And I think this ticks the boxes, obviously, in the planning space, but also in terms of the provision of aged care services in an area which we know is going to be under increasing pressure. So on that basis, very happy to support it. And hopefully we see this as an increased component of local living, living and ageing locally, I suppose.
Thank you. Any further, Councillor Newton?
Just briefly, Madam Mayor.
in the short time I've been on council, so well done. And I think that it is the right place for it. I'm glad to see the investment in the area and the expansion. And I think we know that there are older residents in the area that can stay in the same area as they move to this facility. I think that's wonderful. Well done.
Thank you. Any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to grant this planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Item 5.8, application for planning permit at 281 to 285 Spring Street Reservoir.
The application proposes to construct a 6-storey building containing 30 dwellings and 5 commercial tenancies. 39 parking spaces are provided within a basement with access from Edward Street. There are no restrictive covenants which apply to the land. Notice of the application was provided and one objection was received. It is not included in the report as it was received after the report was written. Council may accept objections up until the time a decision is made. They do not have to arrive during the notification period, but of course that does mean that sometimes when you have deadlines that you have to meet, that these situations occur. So just for the benefit of the committee, I will briefly outline the objections. The objections raised were in relation to the impact of the basement on foundations of existing buildings, the lack of car parking and excessive height. So construction matters such as structural integrity or the impact of a building on another building structural integrity are actually dealt with at a building permit stage and they're not part of the planning process. So that is not, the structural elements are not something that you can consider during the planning process. Car parking has been provided in full for the residences and in part for the commercial tenancies to allow for staff parking. No resident visitor parking is provided. This is considered a reasonable provision for a development in an activity centre with access to fixed rail public transport. The suitability of the height of the building will actually be addressed further in this presentation. So this proposal has strong strategic support from relevant policies and strategies in the Darabin Planning Scheme which encourage development of this type in the Reservoir Activity Centre. The proposal meets the key criteria of the scheme in relation to design and internal and external amenity and the provision of active commercial spaces. The site is located in a commercial area and has no direct residential abutment, and the nearest residential land is located approximately 70 metres to the southwest of the site. As a result of this context, the proposal does not raise any issues in relation to overlooking and overshadowing. At 6 levels, the proposal is 1 storey above the preferred height for the site under the reasonable structure plan. However, the design of the 6th level is visually recessive, which demonstrate that the proposed building can be accommodated on the site without compromising the strategic planning direction of the area and is considered an acceptable planning outcome. Therefore, approval is recommended subject to conditions outlined on pages 159 to 162 of the agenda.
Thank you. I have Gary Wissenman, the applicant, registered to speak. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. As noted by Council, we support this application in terms of its recommendation for fire officer. And as you've heard, this is a very key site within an activity centre. And importantly, it's a corner site and it's an amalgamated site. So it's consolidated with 2 other properties. This therefore provides you with good opportunity to provide a heightened built form that is appropriate and consistent with the evolving character of this particular area. And we know that the structure plan has been put in place and it seeks to encourage development in this area. And we feel that this development will be an excellent contribution towards the character of this area and of the activity centre. And importantly, it provides the catalyst to allow further private investment into the structure, into this area and where the structural plan is. Council has invested with the library, seeking to get development happening in this area, and through improved development and private development, you then allow for improvements in infrastructure to occur, and this is seen as being very important. As the officer has noted, in relation to the top floor, this has been designed to be a recessive element. Now, through this application, we have worked very closely with council planners, the urban designers, in coming up with a design that is appropriate to the context of the site. And with doing this, we have responded and then comments have been provided back. We have then looked at it again and provided further comments. So there's been a constant level of change with this development to come up with a proposal which satisfies council's requirements, and a really successful working relationship had evolved. Importantly, with this as well, we have a diversity of houses, we have a diversity of apartments. It's not just 1 and 2 beds, we have a number of 3 beds as well. And that's quite an exceptional thing to have that diversity within the core area of the activity centre, and seems to be positive for diversity within the centre itself. We feel that overall this meets the aims and the intent of the structure plan, provides a positive contribution, provides the appropriate level of car parking that we see in terms of our city and activity centre, particularly that which is opposite the train station, and will provide excellent activity at the ground floor level, and provide a positive design element that the council can feel positive about, and will assist in the further development of the Reservoir Activity Centre.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions?
I'm happy to...
I'm sorry. Councillor Greco, did you have a question?
Oh, I just have a question, yeah. Just in relation to the height, I note that the structure plan, it exceeds the structure plan, the reservoir structure plan, and I was just wondering that the removal of one level to make it consistent with the structure plan, what will be the impact of that in terms of the mix of the dwellings?
Officers?
In terms of removing a level and maintaining the design integrity of this building, because the podium form and the next 2 levels are actually designed in such a way that you would not want to actually remove one of those levels, because it would actually destroy that design. Probably the level that is most easily removed and not destroy the design integrity of the building would be the uppermost level. That would unfortunately remove the 3-bedroom dwelling which is proposed, as well as 3 2-bedroom dwellings. So it would have an impact on the dwelling diversity of the land. Of the site.
Happy to second the motion.
So Councillor Rennie, you are having to move it, and Councillor Lawrence second. Councillor Rennie.
Look, I actually think that this is the best of all the apartment blocks that I've seen come before me in the short time I've been on council, and I commend the developer for that. In making that assessment, I note particularly the diversity of dwelling size, not only in terms of a mixture of 1, 2 and 3 bedrooms, but in terms of a mixture of smaller 1-bedrooms, larger 1-bedroom, smaller and larger 2-bedrooms, dwellings with balconies that are well in excess of the minimum, which is only 8 metres squared. There's dwellings here that have balconies that are over 100 metres squared. These are really sizable homes, and I think that there will be a significant demand for this kind of apartment living in this location. It's a superb location for building of this type. I note that there's a lot of bedrooms that aren't the minimum sort of 3x3. There's bedrooms that are 3x4 and even 1 or 2 that are larger. And I think that it will be attractive to people who actually buy to live in it, as well as people looking to rent. It's got bedrooms with good windows, which is something else that we haven't seen much of in recent development. So as I said, I think this is the best, and I would like to encourage it by actually giving it the tick tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Before I move on, an addendum was circulated via email this afternoon that outlined the objection. Do you accept that to be included with the report?
Yes, I'm happy for that to be included.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence?
Yes, happy.
Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This obviously has a range of excellent design features that have been mentioned by Councillor Wren, and it really is the beginning of owners or applicants coming and fulfilling the structure plan vision of reservoir area. And for those not familiar with it, there's very few sites that have actually maximised the height there because the economics haven't been there. So this is like Howe Leather. This is sort of the first one off the rank that's large. And of course on Broadway we also have a similar structure plan. The structure plan covers that. And again we have very many narrow shops and family holdings. So it's going to take this area a long time for consolidation to occur. Understand that applicants have been working for years towards this kind of consolidation. So not only is the most prominent site that we should support a full utilisation of it, it is also a very rare opportunity for this council to look at an application that's across a broad range of blocks.
Thank you, Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, I must say I've been swayed by the applicant and by the arguments that have been put forward. I was very concerned about it exceeding the structure plan. Just to talk a little bit about the structure plan, a lot of work went into the structure plan, developing a very forward-looking structure plan for the reservoir area, in terms of trying to unify the area. And my original concern was that already we were going to deviate from that structure plan. But I really take on board the issues about design. I think they're crucial, and I think that this application does offer some encouragement in that direction, and also in terms of the facade, the brickwork, and just the overall look of the design. Again, I'm still very hesitant about the extra level, but I'm willing to concede that on this particular application.
Thank you. Further speakers? Now I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Okay. Councillors, at this point I'm going to call a 5-minute break from the Planning Committee meeting to allow us time to commence our special meeting. If we don't commence the special meeting within 30 minutes, we cannot proceed with that special meeting tonight. Yep, so we'll take a break.
So, do we need a deferral motion for the planning?
I can just we can just take a break, 5-minute break. Okay. Yep.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas. Thank you. Sorry, we almost got through it, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. So we'll proceed to the special meeting.
Sure. So just to be clear, we're opening the special meeting, then we're going to
adjourn it, and we're going to come back to the remaining items. Yes. Okay. Sorry.
Is it in camera?
No.
We'll just open
Great.
it.
Cool.
No, we'll do the person's meeting.
We can adjourn without going to camera.
We can adjourn without going.
Maybe for our officers, to be aware.
So you can stay.
We're just opening a meeting.
Adjourning it and closing it.
So sorry, we'll start the special meeting. Officers don't need, no one needs to leave. We're just opening the meeting, and then we'll adjourn this meeting and go back to the planning meeting. So item 1 is membership, as listed in the agenda of the special meeting. Item 2, apologies. There are no apologies. Item 3, disclosures of conflict of interest. Are there any disclosures to the items listed in the agenda? No. I now seek a motion to adjourn this meeting until, let's say, 8:40.
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried. So we have now adjourned the special meeting, and now we'll go back to the other meeting. Although I called a 5-minute break, doesn't it, if we come back early? No? Okay, good. Sorry. So back to the Planning Committee agenda. 5.9, application for planning permit at 708 to 710 High Street Reservoir. Officers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In recognition of local solutions are often the best solutions to planning outcomes, the committee on the 21st of November resolved to defer this particular item. It's returning back to the planning committee for decision. Unfortunately, despite further discussions between the applicant, council officers and objectors, we're unable to come to a consensus view on the addition of 2 car parking spaces. Now, what the applicant has done is a gesture of goodwill. The application before you does include commitment to raise 2 additional car spaces. That was a central concern that was raised by objectors in presenting to this committee on the 21st of November 2016. The applicant has in good faith put forward that position to adjust the plans and has requested a condition, and that is the recommendation for you. I will say, Madam Chair, the objectors, although not here, maintain their opposition to the proposal. The recommendation again for you is that the application be supported. I'm mindful of the time. I can go through the application again if councillors require, but the report before you is to be taken as read, and the recommendation is that the application be supported. Just want to point out one final thing, is that as a result, the only way those car spaces can be achieved, or 2 additional spaces, is through the use of car stackers. That necessitates a raise in height of 1 metre, and that's detailed in the report. So the condition of interest is condition 1Z, which asks for that change to be made to the plans. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Pauline Moxis has registered to speak on behalf of the applicant.
My position is as a town planner, you may recall this on the basis of the proposed changes presented tonight, which is to include the additional on-site car spaces for 2. A car parking reduction is no longer being sought for the 2 additional dwellings, as the 2 resident spaces are on site. So the only reduction sought is the 1 resident car space. The car parking reduction previously approved at the cafe is carried through to the current proposed amendment, and there is no change in this regard. Therefore, the only consideration before you tonight is based on the built form and the waiver of the 1 resident car space. I would like to mention, and probably reiterating what was said, that the sole concern raised by the previous objectors at the previous meeting was in relation to on-site car parking, and unfortunately they still oppose the proposal. So therefore the matter has been deferred to this meeting for the purposes of the objective negotiation which did occur. And unfortunately they're not here tonight again to indicate why they still have an outstanding concern. I previously discussed and justified the merits of the proposal in terms of its built form, and you may or may not still have the 3D images before you. However, I'm not going to repeat what I said at the previous meeting unless anyone has some questions on that basis. I do believe the owner deserves some recognition of his offer of the additional on-site car parking. Car stackers, as we know, are not inexpensive, and this offer does stand for tonight's meeting without prejudice, so it's part of your consideration for tonight. An independent traffic engineer was engaged with this project, and council's traffic engineers also support the reduction. Nevertheless, the council has the opportunity tonight to accept the proposal with the inclusion of the additional 2 car spaces. I would also like to address concerns made by some of the councillors at the previous meeting regarding non-compliances with rest not being a concern. And I just want to point out that the non-compliances relating to site coverage and front setback were design matters that were already approved
Thank you. Councillors, questions?
Yes, I have a question just in relation to the additional metre created by the car stacker. It says in the report that that's to Unit 5. Unit 5 is the one at the front. I'm not sure where the car stacker would be. Should that be to Unit 6 at the back?
Yeah, it's where the car stackers are. So it's certainly there to accommodate. They've got a roof cavity space that's high, so it enables those spaces to be accommodated. So you are correct.
It's under Unit 5. I can see where the car spaces are.
It's directly above the car spaces.
So that should be.
So that should be
Unit 5.
Should read Unit 5, not Unit 6.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Amin?
I'd like to ask a procedural question. Given that the original objections related to on-site parking and that this has now been addressed through the new plans and the objections remain, I'm wondering whether there's the option for the council to consider the original proposal or whether the options before us are simply to accept or reject the proposal before us.
Officers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will state that the objectors did raise other concerns which are canvassed in the report. They spoke on the 21st November about parking issues, but there were other matters raised. They've been responded to in the officer report.
Yep.
A number of options are available. There is a recommendation before the committee, Madam Chair, and that is putting forward that offering good faith, following an instruction from this committee to see if something could be improved in regards to the concerns that were raised in the evening. So we're in the committee's hands, Madam Chair.
Can I ask a secondary question? And yes. I apologise to the officers if this is beyond the scope of the role and asking something that's inappropriate. But in your view, does the addition of the car stacker have an overall positive or negative impact in terms of amenity for both the current residents and the future residents?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Well, the issue is that it raises the height of that dwelling by 1 metre. The officer in the assessment has weighed that up and said that there's probably not a significant increase in amenity impacts to warrant a change in view. Look, as we recommended previously, the 21st of November, if the application was in dispute at VCAT, the previous proposal was likely to achieve support, and that's the view of the officers at that point in time. The application is further strengthened by the addition from 5 to 7 car spaces through the stackers, even more on the concern raised through objections regarding parking.
Thank you.
If I might, I just have a question in relation to access to that parking at the rear. Looks as though it will be open to pedestrians who could potentially wander in. Am I right in that, or would there be some kind of fence? My question, if I may, sorry for you, Mayor, is whether there are safety concerns in having a car stacker effectively open to the public or children who might run in while the car stacker is in motion. Mostly we see them, I say that, in underground car parks where you would expect that people wouldn't have access.
Thank you. Officers?
Yeah, a lot of car stackers actually have gates that so you can't simply just walk in to it. That area, Councillor Rennie is correct, Madam Chair, that area is open, it's not fenced. But as you enter the car stacker, a lot of those are actually caged out, so they do close.
Thank you. Any further questions? Is there a mover and seconder for the officer recommendation? Or an alternate motion?
I'd like to move the officer recommendation.
And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Rennie.
Look, I guess this one was always going to be a tricky one, but I commend the applicant for willingness to try and resolve the parking issue, and I think that is something that we should note. This is a corner on High Street, the building doesn't present any overshadowing to other buildings because it is a corner on the south side, and therefore adjoining dwellings won't get overshadowing. I confess that I'm not convinced that the introduction of a car stacker is actually an improvement, and I think that is something that I will ponder, but I would be very reluctant to send the applicant away without an approval tonight, because I think that that kind of willingness to actually work with the community to find an outcome is something that is desirable and that we'd like to see more of at a time when the applicant might have gone straight to VCAT.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Williams. Any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. The Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT. The applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. So we're on to item 6, other business. 6.1, general planning information. Scheduled VCAT applications, significant applications and applications for the next planning committee meeting.
Happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Item 7, urgent business. Is there any urgent business? No? Item 8, close of meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to have
lots of questions now.
a couple of minutes.